Chapter 1. The Tick Before the Crash. It was the type of afternoon that made the English countryside seem like a postcard. Golden light poured across the hills of Gloucestershire, casting soft shadows beneath horse-chestnut trees. The spire of St. Osmund's Church pierced a sky so blue it looked painted. Dragonflies skimmed across the narrow stream that wound its way behind Langstone Grange, the grand ancestral home of Sir Everard Brinsley, 3rd Baronet and eccentric horologist. And then the peace was shattered by a scream. It came from the direction of the orchard, near the carriage track that looped around the rear gardens. A sharp, unmistakable cry of alarm, followed by the screech of bicycle tires and the sickening crunch of metal against stone. By the time the housemaid, Lily Kemble, had rushed to the scene with the gardener close behind, the incident had already passed from event to aftermath. Lying sprawled in the gravel, his dark cycling trousers torn, his arm twisted unnaturally beneath him, was the lifeless body of Simon Wintringham, junior architect, amateur cyclist, and the house's most recent guest. His bicycle had come to rest a few feet away, front wheels spinning lazily. But what drew everyone's attention was the smashed remains of what looked to be an elaborate brass device strewn beside him. Cogs, tiny springs, and the faint gleam of a shattered timepiece face littered the ground. Whatever it had been, it was clearly delicate, intricate, and now irreparably broken. By the time Dr. Marbury arrived from the village, the verdict was swift. Wintringham had died instantly, most likely from the blow to the skull, caused not by the crash itself, but by something harder, something deliberate. This wasn't a simple fall, the doctor muttered grimly as he examined the fractured temple. There's a blunt trauma wound here, clean, forceful. He didn't hit the gravel, he was struck. From within the grange, Sir Everard paced in mounting agitation. "This is unthinkable," he said, to no one in particular. "Simon had no enemies. He was a clever boy, talented even, though eccentric, to be sure." The police were summoned, but it was a curious point made by Lily, the housemaid, that first stirred whispers among the assembled household. "There was something odd in his pocket, sir," she said, holding up a torn scrap of blueprint, slightly singed at the edges. It had strange markings like a time dial, but not right, and the rest of the paper was gone. "Gone," Sir Everard snapped. "I found it half stuffed into the hedge, sir. Burned." Her voice quivered. "Someone must have tried to destroy it after. Inspector Bream, a solid, freckled man from Cheltenham, took over with brisk authority. He questioned the household staff and guests, examined the body, and photographed the strange components of the broken mechanism. But there was something in his bearing that said he had already formed a theory he considered sufficient. Accidental fall followed by someone panicking and trying to cover their tracks. Perhaps a rival in the cycling competition? He offered aloud. "But this was no race," came the gentle voice of Miss Beatrix Mornay, a distant cousin of Sir Everard and a guest at the house. She had been painting watercolours in the garden when the scream sounded. Wintringham had been working closely with Sir Everard on a redesign of the Grange's west wing, an extension to include a horological library and mechanical museum funded by the Brinsley Foundation. But lately the architect had been distracted, preoccupied. He spent more time tinkering with strange devices than drawing up plans. "The cyclist's timepiece," he called it once, to Sir Everard's visible discomfort. "A portable chronometric mind, you see," Simon had told the others over supper. "Far more than just a watch. It calculates wind resistance, terrain elevation, even predicts time lost in certain turns. Revolutionary but delicate work." Most found it baffling. Sir Everard had waved it off as a child's fantasy with brass buttons. But privately, He'd been seen locking his own study drawer with more care than usual. Now, with Simon's death, the device was in pieces, and so too, perhaps, was a future fortune. As the afternoon darkened into evening, and the household retreated into hushed dinner conversations and sideways glances, a quiet telephone call was placed to Whitehaven Mansions in London. The butler, Withers, discreet as ever, relayed the message to his master. "Monsieur Poirot, a young man has been murdered in Gloucestershire. There is a timepiece, no, not a normal one. Blueprints destroyed, a mechanical device of sorts. They say it is an accident, but the blow to the head says otherwise. Sir Everard Brinsley has requested the assistance of the detective." There was a pause on the line. Then, in a voice both amused and intrigued, "Ah, a death, a machine, and a mystery buried in the gears. Tell Sir Everard, with pleasure. I, Hercule Poirot, shall come, and we shall see if this device, so clever, was worth a man's life." Chapter 2. Fractured Springs and Fractured Stories. The following morning dawned grey and listless, as though the sky itself mourned the strange death that had darkened Langston Grange. The mist that clung to the lawns gave the ancient house an ethereal quality, the stonework appearing older, sadder, more secretive. In the drawing-room, Inspector Bream sipped his tea with an air of settled finality. "There's no sign of forced entry, no footprints in the gravel save Wintringham's and the maid's, and no witness to the moment of the crash. We've secured the bicycle, the mechanism fragments, and the blueprint scrap." He folded his notebook with a satisfied snap. "I expect the coroner will conclude death by misadventure, perhaps with reckless handling of mechanical parts leading to loss of control." Sir Everard, sitting stiffly in his wing-back chair, did not look convinced. "Simon was many things, Inspector. Reckless with ideas, yes, but not with his hands. His work was delicate, precise." Beatrix Mornay, curled on the window seat in a pale silk morning dress, interjected softly, "Besides, he didn't crash from momentum. I saw the body, Inspector. He was lying far too close to the hedge for a proper tumble. And the wound on his head—" "Yes, yes," Bream sighed, brushing crumbs from his jacket. "The doctor said it wasn't caused by the fall, strictly speaking, but people panic after accidents. Someone may have come across the body and interfered, perhaps thinking he was still alive." At that moment, the unmistakable sound of the gravel drive crunching beneath tires drew their attention. Moments later, Lily appeared, wide-eyed, at the doorway. "Sir Everard, he's arrived." There was a short pause as the household looked at one another, then rose as if compelled by ritual. Into the entrance hall stepped a small, fastidiously dressed man with a glossy moustache, a walking stick tucked under one arm and a travelling hat perched at a rakish tilt. He paused, glanced about the hall as though appraising its symmetry, and offered a polite smile. "Monsieur Poirot," Sir Everard greeted him, moving forward with the awkwardness of a man unaccustomed to seeking help. "Ah, Sir Everard Brinsley," Poirot said, gently removing his gloves. "Permit me to express my condolences. Death, unexpected, violent. Eh bien, it is always a most unwelcome guest." Poirot's eyes swept the room in a single motion, taking in the oil portraits, the subtly mismatched vases on the sideboard, the traces of smoke in the fireplace. He noticed everything, but said nothing. "You'll wish to see the scene, of course," Sir Everard said, "and the, fragments." "Most certainly. But first, perhaps I may be permitted a brief word with those present at the time." Poirot turned to regard the others, Inspector Bream, who now stood with arms folded, Miss Mornay, still perched by the window, and a nervous-looking man who had just entered quietly, a Mr. Giles Trent, introduced as a family solicitor. Poirot gave each a small, courteous bow. "Bon, let us begin with the scene of the crime." The orchard path where Wintringham had fallen was silent now. A faint chalk outline marked where the body had lain. The bicycle stood propped against the hedgerow, its front wheel mangled, its chain detached. Poirot knelt beside it, examining the damage. He held his gloved hand above the shattered mechanism pieces gathered in a cloth-lined tray and peered through his small lens. His fingers hovered over the brass cogs, gears, and a curious coiled spring that had warped on impact. "This was no ordinary timepiece," he murmured. "A combination of speedometer, anemometer, perhaps even barometric. Functionality? Precision craftsmanship. But tampered with, perhaps." He stood and faced the group. "And the blueprint fragment, if you please." Bream produced it from a case. Poirot studied the scrap, his eyes narrowing. "It has been burned deliberately. Note here the clean tear and here the singed edge. Someone wanted the design partially destroyed, but not entirely." "Curious?" Sir Everard nodded grimly. "He showed it to me the night before he died. Said he had finally solved the gyroscopic balancing unit. I told him the idea was fanciful, dangerous even. He was upset." Poirot turned. "Did anyone else know of this invention?" The group hesitated. Then Trent, the solicitor, cleared his throat. "Mr. Wintringham was in discussions with a few private investors. He believed the design had commercial potential." "Was that not your idea, Sir Everard?" Poirot asked, eyeing him carefully. "I supported his creativity," the baronet said stiffly. "But the Brinsley name is not meant to be splashed across gadgetry." Beatrix spoke up. "Simon confided in me that he feared someone was watching his work. He mentioned his documents had been moved. Once, even when his door was locked." "Ah," Poirot said softly. "Secrets within the house. They multiply quickly." A low cough interrupted them. It was Withers, the butler. "If I may, sir, a peculiar envelope was found this morning, stuffed into the back of the fireplace in the guest study." He handed it to Poirot. The Belgian detective opened it carefully and drew out 2 thin sheets, unburned copies of the original blueprint. But they had been reversed, mirror images as though intended to confuse. Poirot's eyes glinted. "A clever trick, but not clever enough. The person who hid this meant to mislead, not destroy." He turned back to the bicycle, studying the orientation of the crash site, the wheel marks in the gravel, the slope of the path. "A man does not fall like this by accident," he said finally. "No, he struck at speed, perhaps chased, and the mechanism, perhaps it was not merely damaged in the fall, but sabotaged before it." Poirot dusted his hands and smiled faintly. "I believe, mes amis, that we must speak to each guest, each one, and very carefully. For the answer, I think, lies not in the device alone, but in who feared what it could reveal." Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. As the mist gave way to a pale, watery sun over Langston Grange, the atmosphere within the manor remained as tense as drawn wire. The drawing-room, with its dark panelling and aged tapestries, became the theatre of subtle posturing and veiled glances, as Hercule Poirot requested the presence of everyone connected to the late Simon Wintringham. Sir Everard, despite his usual distaste for domestic drama, had instructed Withers to gather the household and guests for introductions. "Monsieur Poirot wishes to understand the lay of the land," he had said stiffly. "Let us indulge him." And so by 11 o'clock, the drawing-room became a quiet nest of secrets. Poirot stood near the hearth, gently warming his gloved hands, while Hastings, recently arrived and still blinking off the sleep of a hurried train ride, stood at his side, notebook in hand. "I dare say, Poirot," Hastings whispered, "this feels like a chess match. Everyone seems to be watching everyone else." "Just so, mon ami," murmured Poirot. Observe the eyes, the posture, the silences between words. The truth often hides, not in what is said, but in what remains unsaid. Withers cleared his throat. "May I begin, sir?" Poirot nodded graciously. First to step forward was Sir Everard Brinsley, the host, a man of 70, proud and polished, with silver hair, hawk-like features, and a barely concealed irritation at this entire affair. His baritone voice betrayed a lifetime of commanding rooms. "Simon was working with me on a renovation," he said. "Brilliant, yes, but erratic. He talked of revolutionizing transportation. Nonsense." Poirot noted the clenched fists and the way Everard's gaze flickered toward the blueprint fragment on the mantelpiece. "And you, monsieur, did you believe the invention had merit?" Sir Everard hesitated. "Not for a moment. The boy was clever, yes, but the real world is no place for clockwork fantasies." Next came Beatrix Mornay, the cousin, late 30s, widowed, possessing the composed grace of one who had long since learned to keep her thoughts to herself. She wore a string of freshwater pearls and a smile just tight enough to be polite. "I liked Simon," she said softly. "He was passionate, if overly dramatic. I painted in the gardens often. He'd bicycle past me head full of numbers." "Did he confide in you?" Poirot asked. Beatrix hesitated only slightly. "He did mention he thought someone had entered his study at night. I told him it was nerves." "Or guilt?" murmured Poirot. Beatrix blinked. "You think he had something to hide?" Poirot said nothing. He merely turned his head to the next figure, Giles Trent, the solicitor. Mid-40s, cautious eyes, neatly parted hair. His pinstripe suit was pressed, his voice clipped. "Mr. Wintringham had asked me to review a patent application. He believed this cyclist's timepiece could earn him a fortune. I advised discretion. Many ideas are stolen before they mature." "And was there anyone interested in such a theft, monsieur?" Giles paused. "Anyone with an understanding of engineering might have seen its value." "Or someone with an understanding of profit," murmured Poirot. Hastings, watching closely, scribbled something. Then came Miss Daphne Lovelace, the house guest no one quite seemed to explain. Petite, bird-like, dressed in a chic travel ensemble that belonged more in Paris than the Cotswolds. She lit a cigarette with a trembling hand. "I hardly knew the man," she said airily. "Simon was intense, rather too intense for my liking. He once accused me of reading his journal. Imagine." "You did not?" Poirot asked. She laughed. "Certainly not. I only glanced at a page once. Something about gyroscopic phase delays or some such gibberish. Boring as boiled spinach. And you are here because—" "Oh, Beatrix and I met in Cannes. She invited me. And this house." She looked about with theatrical flair. "So dreadfully charming in a cold, looming way." Poirot inclined his head, then turned to the final guest. Mr. Leo Ainsworth, a rugged, broad-shouldered man of indeterminate age, with oil-stained fingers and a mechanic's gait. He had arrived late the previous evening, and few had spoken to him. "Simon and I studied together once," he said gruffly. "He contacted me again a month ago. Said he needed someone to build prototypes. Offer me a cut. I didn't sign anything." "Did he share the full designs with you?" Leo smirked. "Half, maybe. He kept the final part close to his chest. Said he didn't want anyone running off with it." Poirot folded his hands. "And you would not have?" Leo looked him straight in the eye. "I build machines, monsieur. I won't steal them." There was a stillness as Poirot glanced across the room. 5 guests, 1 dead man, and a shattered device no one seemed to fully understand. "I thank you all," he said finally. "Invention, ambition, secrets, and a sudden death. It is a volatile combination, n'est-ce pas? I shall ask more questions in time, but for now, I advise, no one should leave the estate. Not yet. He turned to Hastings and spoke under his breath. One among them lies, not merely about their movements, but about their intentions. A mind like Monsieur Wintringham's makes enemies not from hatred, but envy. Hastings leaned in. Do you have a suspect? Poirot's moustache twitched. Not yet, mon ami, but already I smell fear, and fear is the most dangerous scent of all. Chapter 4. Poirot observes the clockwork of character. The morning mist had lifted, revealing the full, sombre elegance of Langstone Grange, its ivy-covered stone, the fluted columns along the front portico, and the wide circular driveway that curled like a serpent around the estate's ancient fountain. From his vantage point on the eastern terrace, Hercule Poirot watched a robin hop across the sundial and murmured to himself, "Time, always time. Even murder must obey its rhythm." He sipped his chocolate shawl delicately from a porcelain cup as Captain Hastings joined him, notebook in hand, looking more alert after a hearty breakfast. "Well," said Hastings, "there's a curious lot, I must say. Sir Everard seems to think the whole matter's beneath his dignity, and that solicitor fellow, Trent, gives me the willies. As for Miss Lovelace, I rather thought she was putting on an act." Poirot raised a brow. "Ah, mon ami, you observe, but you do not yet see. It is not merely their words or mannerisms that concern me. It is their alignment, their internal clockwork. Like a fine Swiss watch, each part plays a role, even if the case hides the gears." He gestured toward the gravel path below, where Sir Everard was deep in discussion with Giles Trent near the greenhouse. Their postures were tight, hands folded, eyes darting. "Note the distance between them," Poirot said. "Not close enough for trust, not far enough for true suspicion. That is the distance of shared secrets, ones they are both afraid might come to light." "But Trent's just the legal chap, surely?" "Exactly," murmured Poirot. "And legal men do not often frequent country houses without cause. Sir Everard said the West Wing project was on hold. Why invite an architect and solicitor during such a pause?" Hastings frowned. "You think the blueprint has something to do with it?" "I think," Poirot said softly, "that Simon Wintringham held a key to something larger, either a fortune or a disgrace." At that moment, Withers appeared on the terrace. "Monsieur Poirot, Miss Mornay requests a word with you in the music room. She said—" "It concerns Mr. Wintringham's behaviour before his death." Poirot nodded. "Let us not keep la dame waiting." The music room was a cavern of faded opulence, high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and a walnut grand piano that hadn't been played in years. Beatrix Mornay stood at the window, one hand clutching a folded linen handkerchief. She turned slowly as Poirot entered. "I didn't want to say this before the others," she began, her voice low. But Simon had grown afraid, paranoid even. He began locking his door at night, refused to eat from shared dishes, and he left notes hidden in my books, odd scraps of ideas, warnings. Poirot stepped closer. "May I see one?" She opened a drawer and handed him a folded sheet. It was torn from a sketch pad, scrawled with spidery ink. "A movement interfered, counterweight imbalance, not accident. Watch the silence." Poirot studied it with quiet intensity. He feared sabotage, and he suspected someone close, but what does he mean by watch the silence? "I don't know, but there's more," she said, hesitating. "Simon came to me 3 nights before the accident. He was trembling. He told me he had found something in Sir Everard's locked cabinet, something he shouldn't have." Poirot turned sharply. "Did he say what?" "Number only that it changed everything." He paused, then bowed slightly. "Merci, mademoiselle." You have told me something most valuable, not about the cabinet, but about Simon's state of mind." As he left the music room, Poirot encountered Leo Ainsworth leaning against the banister, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Had a look at the busted frame," he said. "That crash didn't come from gear. Failure?" "No," said Poirot lightly. The brake line was cut, deliberately, clean slice. "You don't do that with a stone in your pocket." Poirot stopped. "Did you tell the inspector?" Leo shrugged. "Thought I'd tell you first. Police jumped to conclusions. You think someone murdered him?" "I think," Poirot said slowly, "that someone wanted him stopped, and not just from cycling." He descended the stairs in silence. Later that afternoon, the guests were assembled in the library. Poirot moved among them with seemingly idle grace, commenting on the stormy sky gathering beyond the windows, remarking on the antique astrolabe that adorned the mantel, even complimenting Sir Everard's library organisation. But then his tone shifted. "You see," he said to the group, "a device like the cyclist's timepiece, it is not merely metal, it is ambition, it is threat, it is promise, and that, mes amis, is what makes it dangerous." Beatrix glanced uneasily at Giles Trent, who did not meet her gaze. Poirot turned to Miss Lovelace. "Mademoiselle, you said earlier you barely knew Monsieur Wintringham." "Quite right. And yet I find a telegram in his drawer, sent to you, dated 3 days before his death. It reads, 'Blueprint complete, prototype locked. Shall I bring to you first?'" Lovelace's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. "Well, He was being dramatic." "Indeed?" Poirot's tone was dry. "It is what one does after receiving such a message that is important." Sir Everard rose, his face flushing. "Are you suggesting one of us killed that poor boy over a toy?" "No, monsieur, not a toy. A blueprint worth more than any family crest. A design that someone feared would expose far too much." He turned toward the window, watching a single drop of rain trail down the glass. "The storm, mes amis, is not outside. It is in this house, and it has only just begun." Chapter 5. The interviews begin. The rain arrived mid-afternoon, soft at first like the hushed breath of a secret, before growing into a steady downpour that blurred the hedges beyond the drawing-room window. Inside, Hercule Poirot had claimed a velvet armchair, his hands steepled, his eyes half-closed in thought. He did not speak for several minutes, merely listened to the rain, the creak of wood, the subtle tension threading through Langstone Grange. At last he stirred. "Hastings," he said, "we begin now." The interviews, one by one. We shall hear not only what they tell us, but what they reveal in silence. Hastings gave a brisk nod. "Whom first?" Poirot smiled faintly. "The solicitor." Messieurs of the law, always so careful with their words. Let's see if he can be careful with his truth. Interview 1, Giles Trent. Giles. Trent arrived punctually as expected. His posture was impeccable, his cufflinks gleaming despite the storm outside. "I understand the need for these discussions, Monsieur Poirot," he said, "but I have nothing useful to add." Poirot nodded graciously. But sometimes the smallest thing, an expression, a hesitation, tells the greatest truths. Now, monsieur, your dealings with Monsieur Wintringham, what were they exactly?" Trent's tone became brisk. "Simon approached me a month ago with a proposal. He intended to patent a mechanical device he'd been refining, some cross between a precision timepiece and a kinetic sensor. I reviewed the documents, advised him on the language. That was all. No investment from your side? I am not in the habit of gambling on eccentric contraptions." Poirot tilted his head. "Yet you travelled all the way to Gloucestershire to see him again?" "I was here on Sir Everard's invitation, not Simon's." "And yet," Poirot said mildly. "You spent a great deal of time near the study. With the blueprints?" Trent's jaw stiffened. "I told you I had no further interest in them. My work was finished." Poirot let the silence stretch. "Very well, monsieur. That will do, for now." As Trent left the room, Hastings muttered, "You don't believe him, do you?" "I believe," said Poirot, "that Monsieur Tron has practiced honesty until it sounds like truth." "But it only sounds like it." Now, Interview 2, Beatrix Mornay. Beatrix entered quietly, her dress of pale grey silk making no sound. She looked tired, but composed. "I should warn you, Monsieur Poirot," she said, taking a seat. "I've no alibi, if that's what you seek." "Non, non, madame, I seek only clarity. You cared for Simon." "I pitied him. That's not the same as love." Poirot's brow lifted. "Pity? Why?" "He reminded me of someone long ago, brilliant but doomed. Simon was chasing something that would always outrun him. I could see it in his eyes." "And you believe someone here stopped his pursuit?" Beatrix looked toward the window. "There are people in this house who fear exposure more than they fear justice. Simon found something. I think he tried to use it." "For gain? Or leverage?" Poirot leaned forward. "You have spoken wisely. One final question, madame. Do you know what was inside Sir Everard's locked cabinet?" She didn't hesitate. "Number. But Simon said it wasn't about money. It was about names." Poirot blinked slowly. "Names?" She nodded. "People. Connections. He said the blueprint might open a device, yes, but it could also open a door." When she left the room, Poirot remained silent for several long moments. "A door," he murmured. "That is interesting." Interview 3. Leo Ainsworth. Leo Ainsworth sat stiffly, his hands clasped between his knees. "Look, I told you already, Simon was a friend. A difficult one, but a friend." Poirot was gentle. "You worked on the device?" "Built the shell, fitted the cogs, but Simon never gave me the core specs. He didn't trust anyone fully." "Did that offend you?" Ainsworth shrugged. "He was right not to trust people. Someone cut that brake line. He wouldn't have died if the mechanism failed. He knew how to fall. But someone made sure he couldn't stop." "Did you confront anyone?" "I had a word with the solicitor, asked if Simon had mentioned any threats." He dodged the question. Poirot leaned back. "And did you want a share of the invention?" Ainsworth smiled tiredly. "I wanted him to succeed. We both came from nothing. But I'm no thief, Poirot. I make things with my hands, not schemes." When Ainsworth exited, Hastings scratched a note. "He's the most genuine one yet," he whispered. Poirot didn't answer. For Interview 4, Miss Daphne Lovelace. Miss Lovelace entered in a haze of perfume and disdain. "Oh, darling, I truly hope we're nearing the end of all this," she sighed. "All this gloom is wrecking my nerves." Poirot offered a polite smile. "You knew about the invention?" "Of course. Simon couldn't keep a secret. He was dying to impress someone." "Impress you?" "Please," she said, tossing her hair. "I find men who tinker with springs and screws dreadfully dull. Simon liked to pretend he was some genius, but he wasn't special. Yet you kept his telegram." Her smile faltered. "It amused me." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And the blueprint?" "I've no idea what you mean." "You attempted to burn the copy?" A moment's pause. "Oh, that!" I panicked. I thought it made me look involved. And I'm not involved. "Not even if he left something in your room?" She paled. "Did he?" Poirot rose. But your reaction tells me everything I needed to know." As the interviews concluded and the rain continued tapping at the glass, Poirot stood quietly. They each carry secrets, Hastings, but one of them, has started to unravel. I saw it just now." Hastings leaned in. "Which one?" Poirot raised a finger. "Patience, mon ami. The gears must turn, and then the clock shall strike." Chapter 6. The first false lead. It was nearing dusk when the disturbance occurred, a loud clatter from the lower corridor, followed by the crash of something fragile, and a shriek that echoed across the tiled halls of Langstone Grange. Poirot and Hastings, seated in the library, reviewing the day's interviews, rose at once. They arrived to find Lily, the maid, white-faced, clutching the frame of the butler's pantry doorway. It's the study, sir," she cried. "Someone's gone through it again." Poirot hurried down the corridor, coat-tails fluttering, and pushed open the heavy oak door of the guest study. A single lamp illuminated the room, and on the floor, amid a mess of overturned papers and broken glass, lay a small brass box, smashed open. "Touch nothing," Poirot said sharply, kneeling to examine the box's jagged interior. "Hastings, bring my gloves." The box had clearly been locked until recently. A fine silver clasp had been forcibly pried open, and inside, crumpled at the bottom, was what appeared to be ash. Not from paper, but cloth. Poirot lifted a few dark flakes with a delicate pin. "A fabric lining. Burned," he murmured. "Something was hidden here and deliberately destroyed tonight." "Could it have been the rest of the blueprint?" Hastings asked. "Or something else entirely," Poirot replied. "A prototype component? A personal letter? Ah, but why destroy it now?" He turned to Lily. "Who found this?" "I did, sir. I heard someone moving around and thought it might be Withers, but he was with Cook. I saw a shadow in the hallway, then the sound, like metal being forced." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And who was unaccounted for?" Sir Everard entered behind them, frowning. "I'll tell you who, Leo Ainsworth. The man's disappeared." The guests assembled quickly after that. Anxious voices, the rising tension like static in the walls. Daphne Lovelace was pale and unusually quiet, while Giles Trent muttered under his breath about calling in the local constabulary. Beatrix Mornay said nothing at all. Poirot raised a hand. "Let us not panic. Monsieur Ainsworth has not yet been found, but that does not mean he has fled. Withers, search the grounds. Hastings, accompany him." They left swiftly, and Poirot turned back toward the scattered mess of the study. Sir Everard stood stiffly, arms crossed. The man was clearly after something. Simon probably gave him too much of the blueprint. Ainsworth's hands were in this from the start. Poirot studied him. "Do you accuse him of murder, then?" "I accuse him of treachery," the baronet snapped. "And theft?" "Interesting," Poirot murmured, "because a moment ago you said only that he had disappeared." Sir Everard's eyes flashed. "I know a guilty man when I see one." "Do you?" Poirot asked mildly. "We shall see." Half an hour passed before Hastings and Withers returned, and with them, unexpectedly, was Leo Ainsworth himself, soaked to the skin and carrying a rusted tin case under one arm. "Well," he growled, "you think I ran, didn't you?" Poirot smiled faintly. The thought crossed a few minds. "I was in the shed out by the orchard," Leo said, shaking water from his jacket, "looking for Simon's toolkit. I remembered he kept a duplicate of the mechanism casing there. I thought, well, if someone's been tampering, the old prototype might show how." He opened the tin case carefully. Inside, cushioned in an oily rag, was a circular metal chassis, similar in design to the one Wintringham had been riding with when he died, but clearly older. Poirot leaned forward. "Remarkably preserved," he said softly. "And," Untouched by recent hands, yes? Leo nodded. Simon kept it locked in a drawer. I helped him test the balance ring a few weeks ago. Poirot examined the hinges, noting a slight discoloration on one edge. This section, has it been filed recently? Leo squinted. Could be. Not by me. Poirot said nothing. He looked up at Sir Everard, who had grown tense. Then the question becomes, Poirot said gently, if someone tampered with this earlier version, what might they have learned or feared? Giles Trent stepped forward suddenly. Are we suggesting Ainsworth is blameless then? He had access, opportunity, mechanical knowledge. So did you, monsieur, Poirot said without turning, as did anyone who visited Simon's study. Trent's jaw clenched, but he said nothing more. Poirot addressed the group. This incident, the box smashed, the object inside destroyed, was not spontaneous. It was desperate. Someone feared what might be found, but instead of revealing the culprit, it gave us a distraction. Beatrix Mornay finally spoke. A false lead. Exactly, Poirot said. An interruption meant to make us look away. He turned to the others. So now I must ask, who benefits from panic, from suspicion turned against another? That, mes amis, is where the real motive lives. Back in the solitude of the drawing room, Poirot spoke quietly to Hastings. It was too early for the criminal to act. They feared something, but they acted before knowing if it would be discovered. That haste, Hastings, that is human, and it is their first mistake. Hastings scribbled a note. And the second? Poirot's eyes glinted. They chose the wrong scapegoat, and I, Hercule Poirot, never pursue the false lead. I let it run ahead until it circles back to its master. Chapter 7. The psychological game. The rain had ceased, but the hush that followed was heavier than the downpour. In the soft-lit drawing-room of Langston Grange, the assembled guests sat tautly, as if waiting for an unspoken cue. Poirot, legs crossed, fingertips together, observed them as a chess master might study the board before making his opening feint. "Tonight," he said quietly, "we do not speak of mechanisms or diagrams, no. Tonight we speak of people and of what lies beneath what is said aloud." The others exchanged wary glances. Poirot's eyes landed on Beatrix Mornay. "Mademoiselle, may I ask a curious thing? Why did you never mention that you and Monsieur Wintringham had once been engaged?" The room stiffened. Beatrix's expression remained composed, though her lips tightened. "Because it ended years ago. We were not on speaking terms when I last saw him." "But you came to Langstone Grange after receiving an invitation from him?" Poirot pressed gently. She looked away. "Because he wrote to me, a single line. Come, the clock runs backward now. I didn't know what it meant. I came out of curiosity." "And yet," Poirot said, "you did not mention it before. Why?" "I didn't want to be seen as someone with residual emotions." "Ah," Poirot said, nodding slowly. "And were there any?" Beatrix flinched. "He was brilliant," she admitted, voice low. "And it's difficult. He cared for little beyond his work. I left because I was invisible beside his inventions." Poirot tilted his head. "And now, when he is gone, do you feel regret, or something else?" Beatrix gave no answer, but the tremble in her hands did not escape Poirot's notice. He turned smoothly. "Sir Everard." "Yes?" "I have often found," Poirot mused, "that those who rush to point fingers are often seeking to distract from their own tremors. You accused Monsieur Ainsworth of treachery, but I wonder, do you know precisely what was being built here?" Sir Everard hesitated. "Simon told me the basics." "The basics," Poirot repeated. "Yet you financed his work. You brought the investors. For a man who so dislikes uncertainty, you entrusted your legacy to a blueprint you didn't understand? Sir Everard's voice grew curt. Simon was a genius. I didn't need to understand it. I believed in the results. Results which were, shall we say, slow to appear? Poirot raised an eyebrow. And that, I suspect, was growing problematic. Sir Everard stood. I'll not be accused of murder by innuendo. No, Poirot said lightly. Only pressure, and pressure, mon ami, breaks more than glass. There was a charged silence. Poirot leaned back, letting the moment simmer. Then he turned his gaze to Daphne Lovelace. Madame, he said with unusual softness, you haven't spoken much. But your eyes, they are always watching. Daphne, who had sat near the hearth with an air of quiet distress, looked up with a start. What is there to say? I barely knew Simon. Yet you walk the halls of this house like someone remembering echoes, Poirot said. Your familiarity with Langstone Grange is too fluid to be recent. Daphne's voice faltered. My father was Sir Everard's solicitor. I used to come here as a child. Poirot smiled gently. So, you knew Simon as a boy? She gave a nod. Yes, we played together. That was long ago. And you had not seen him since? Daphne hesitated. Not until last year. Ah, Poirot said, so something changed. May I ask, did Simon seek you out again? Or did you return to him? Daphne did not answer, but her cheeks flushed with a colour no lamplight could explain. From the corner, Giles Trent scoffed. What are you implying, Poirot, that we all had some secret rendezvous with the deceased? Not all, Poirot said, turning to him with sudden sharpness. But some of you did, and secrets, you see, have a habit of surfacing when a man dies unexpectedly. Giles crossed his arms. I worked with Simon. I respected him. Poirot stood slowly. Respect, or rivalry. You are not the only one in this house with an engineering mind, monsieur, but you are the only one who submitted a patent 6 days before Simon's accident. The room snapped into stillness. Giles looked stunned. That was for a separate invention, entirely unrelated. Perhaps, Poirot said. Perhaps not. That will be for me to determine. Poirot walked to the window, drawing the heavy drape aside. The storm had passed, but the moonlight filtered dimly through the misted glass. We are no longer dealing with a question of mechanics, he said at last. We are dealing with emotions, buried ones, jealousy, rejection, pride, and these are what killed Simon Wintringham. He turned back to the room. Tomorrow, I will require private conversations with each of you. For now, I bid you good night. He bowed slightly and exited, Hastings trailing behind him like a loyal hound. In the corridor outside, Hastings exhaled. Well, I must say you ruffled quite a few feathers in there. Poirot's moustache twitched. Oui, mon ami, but birds fly most erratically when frightened. And one of them, I think, has already shown me the direction of the wind. Chapter 8. A Secondary Mystery. The following morning arrived under a bruised sky, the sun unable to break through the dense mist that clung to Langstone Grange like a lingering doubt. Breakfast was subdued. Conversation, if it could be called that, consisted of clinking cutlery and the occasional cleared throat. Even the ever-boisterous Giles Trent muttered his requests for toast with unusual reserve. Poirot, dressed immaculately as ever in dove grey, arrived last. He took his tea with a precise stir, then turned to Hastings with a faint smile. You see how the silence has ripened, mon ami? When there is guilt in the air, the appetite retreats. Mine hasn't, Hastings said, taking a hearty bite of egg. Though I'd rather not be accused for it. Poirot didn't laugh. He was already surveying the room. Daphne Lovelace sat pale and withdrawn, her gaze distant. Leo Ainsworth stared at his plate, shoulders hunched, as though expecting another accusation. Beatrix Mornay, though as poised as ever, glanced nervously toward the library doors. Giles avoided everyone's eyes, and Sir Everard read the paper with feigned indifference. Poirot rose. "After breakfast I will speak to each of you in turn," he announced, with privacy, with honesty, and with an open mind. Sir Everard snorted. "This isn't some drawing-room drama, Poirot." "No," Poirot said, "but the drawing-room is where truth hides in plain sight." The first interview was with Beatrix. She met Poirot in the morning room. Sunlight filtered through pale curtains, giving her face a soft, uncertain glow. "I imagine I've become a suspect," she said coolly. "We are all suspects until someone ceases to be," Poirot replied. "I must ask, why did Simon invite you?" Beatrix folded her hands in her lap. "I told you he wrote me a strange letter. The clock runs backward now. I thought it was just his eccentricity." "Perhaps," Poirot said. "But you left him years ago. Why come back now?" Beatrix looked down. "Because I wanted to know if he had changed, if he regretted it. I thought maybe he was reaching out." Poirot observed her. "And did he? Regret it?" "I think so," she said softly. "But he never said it aloud. That wasn't his way." Poirot nodded. "And yet when he died, he was cycling with a timepiece of his own making. Something symbolic, perhaps?" Beatrix's expression didn't change, but her eyes flicked up sharply. Poirot smiled slightly. "That will be all for now, mademoiselle." Next was Leo Ainsworth. He came in bristling, as if daring Poirot to challenge him. "You think I broke into that box?" he said. "I didn't." "No," Poirot said calmly, "but someone wanted you to appear guilty." Leo scowled. "Wouldn't be the first time." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Did you and Simon argue recently?" Leo hesitated. "We disagreed. He was too focused on the theory, never enough on the application. He wouldn't patent it. Said it wasn't ready, said it never would be. Yet you were listed as co-developer." "That was a courtesy," Leo said bitterly. "Simon wanted the glory, not the hassle of production." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And did that frustrate you?" Leo's silence spoke volumes. Poirot leaned in. "When a man keeps all the blueprints in his head, the only way to take the invention is to take the man." Leo flinched. "I wouldn't. I might have been angry, but I'm not a murderer." Poirot nodded. "Merci, monsieur." Daphne Lovelace was third. She arrived looking fragile, hands folded like prayer. Poirot offered her a seat by the fire. "Miss Lovelace, tell me, what is it you're not saying?" She blinked. "I don't know what you mean." Poirot smiled gently. "You are not the murderer. But you know something you believe is irrelevant, and so you've tucked it away. This is common, but sometimes the smallest stone causes the avalanche." Daphne hesitated, then in a whisper, "Simon came to my room 3 nights before he died." Poirot did not move. He looked frightened, not of a person, of an idea. He said, "It works, Daphne, but it shouldn't work like this." Then he left. Poirot's voice was soft. "And you didn't tell anyone?" "No," she whispered. "I didn't know what it meant." Poirot stood. "You have helped more than you know." He saw Giles next. The engineer was defensive from the start. "I know what this is. You think I had motive, but I wasn't. Jealous. I was tired." "Tired?" Poirot asked. "Of being second? Always second. My work's good. But Simon, he was, visionary." "You filed a patent," Poirot said mildly. 6 days before Simon died. "For a different design," Giles insisted. My own. I wouldn't stoop to stealing his. Yet you feared he might accuse you. Giles stood. If I were guilty, I wouldn't still be here. Many guilty men stay precisely where they hope suspicion won't reach. Giles's jaw tensed. You'll see I'm right. Poirot merely nodded. Finally, Sir Everard, the baronet poured himself a scotch before sitting. You've stirred the house nicely, he said. Truth is not a still pond, Poirot replied. Did Simon threaten to cut off funding? Sir Everard narrowed his eyes. He was secretive. I'd invested thousands with no clear return. Did you pressure him? I encouraged him, Sir Everard said tightly. But he was paranoid, thought we'd exploit him. Would you have? Poirot asked softly. Sir Everard didn't answer. When Poirot and Hastings regrouped, the detective appeared thoughtful. We are close now, Hastings. The threads are tightening. Which thread, though? Hastings asked. There are so many. Poirot smiled. Ah, but mon ami, that is the beauty of a well-wound mechanism. One cut gear, and the whole machine falters. I now know where that cut lies. Tomorrow, we shall unravel the rest. Chapter 9. The mechanism of motive. The morning after Poirot's interviews dawned clearer. The fog that had clung to Langston Grange now lifted, both literally and, perhaps, metaphorically. Yet the clarity in the sky only seemed to make the air inside the manor heavier with tension. The household had become a clockwork of silence, each person moving cautiously, as though afraid a misplaced word might trigger catastrophe. Poirot emerged from his room precisely at 9, as if summoned by an invisible chime. Hastings followed close behind, notebook in hand, brow furrowed. "You've an idea, haven't you, Poirot?" he asked quietly. Poirot nodded, adjusting his cuffs with care. "Oh yes, mon ami, an idea most delicate, like the movement of a fine Swiss watch, but I must first test the spring before I let it unwind." They descended to the drawing-room, where the others had already gathered. Beatrix stood by the window, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the distant hills. Leo Ainsworth hovered near the bar-cart, though he had not poured a drink. Giles sat in a low armchair, nervously flipping a pen between his fingers. Daphne, quiet as ever, occupied a corner of the settee, hands tightly clasped. Sir Everard had positioned himself at the fireplace, as though guarding something invisible. "Good morning," Poirot said, eyes sweeping across the group. "This morning I require your indulgence. I have arranged a small demonstration." Sir Everard's eyebrows rose. "What is this, a parlour trick?" Poirot smiled gently. "Non, monsieur, but it may be the only way to reveal the true nature of what occurred." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded sheet of parchment, a reproduction of Simon Duval's schematic. Hastings had copied it precisely the evening before, based on fragments shown to them in the lab. "This," Poirot began, placing it on the table, "is a working model of Duval's cyclometric timepiece. It is unlike any conventional watch. Instead of measuring linear time, it calculates decay and pressure. He used it to gauge rotational memory in gears, extremely rare, extremely precise." Giles leaned forward. "That's why he wore it on the ride. He wanted to test the strain across long distances." "Just so," Poirot said. "But this watch also held something else, something that none of you yet considered. A pattern." Beatrix's brow furrowed. "A pattern?" Poirot gestured again. "Simon wasn't only building machines, he was building language. This blueprint, when decoded properly, also reveals a ciphered message." The room fell silent. "Impossible," Leo muttered. "Difficult, yes," Poirot said. "Impossible? Non." He turned to Hastings. "Show them, mon ami." Hastings unfolded a second paper, an overlay of letters, numbers, and gear rotations. It looked like a map built from madness, but when placed carefully over the schematic, as Poirot now demonstrated, the wheels and cogs aligned with phrases in the margins. "It works," Beatrix read aloud from the top corner, "but not as I imagined." Poirot nodded. Simon had realized that his invention could record more than motion. It captured time anomalies, aberrations, memory loops in mechanical systems. If someone tampered with his machine while he wasn't present, it would show. He looked around. And it did. When the timepiece was retrieved from the body, a minute cog had rotated 3 additional revolutions. An impossible result, unless it had been wound and released manually before his death. "You mean someone used it to fake the time of death?" Giles asked, voice rising. "No," Poirot said. "Worse, someone triggered the cyclometric collapse, a function only Simon knew how to stabilize. Without the correction, the gears would bind, then fail, catastrophically." Daphne gasped. "So, the accident wasn't an accident at all?" "Exactement," Poirot said softly. "The machine did not kill Simon, but it betrayed the one who sabotaged it. The missing tool from Simon's lab, the reversed calibration, the altered formula, someone tampered with it in the hours before the ride. They trusted Simon would detect nothing, but he did. And he recorded it, here, within the blueprint." He placed his hand on the cipher. Leo stepped forward, visibly pale. "You're saying someone killed him using his, own creation?"
"Oui, but more than that. They used his trust, his habits, his obsession against him." Poirot's eyes landed on Beatrix, who looked away. Then to Leo, whose jaw was clenched. Then Giles. And then finally Daphne. "You knew the truth," he said gently. "Or part of it." She blinked. "No, Poirot, You said he came to you. Afraid. Confused. But what frightened him, mademoiselle, was not the invention. It was that someone else had understood it." Poirot turned, voice rising just slightly. "The person who knew how to manipulate rotational memory, who had studied the blueprints not for their philosophical meaning, but their mechanical weakness, who knew the tolerances of Simon's designs intimately, was the one who'd always been near, always watching." Giles stood up abruptly, pen falling from his hand. "You can't mean—" But Poirot raised a hand. "No, not yet. There is still one piece to fall into place." He stepped back, hands behind his back. "And when it does, time will no longer be an illusion. It will be true, and the mechanism, c'est fini." Chapter 10. A Fatal Precision. The drawing-room settled into an unnatural stillness. Poirot's final phrase, "and the mechanism, c'est fini," seemed to echo across the parquet floorboards like the toll of a distant clock tower. No one moved. Even the flames in the fireplace sputtered low, as if reluctant to stir the quiet. Then Sir Everard finally spoke, clearing his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, forgive me, but this is quite beyond the usual method of detection. Rotational memory? Mechanical betrayal?" He gestured vaguely at the blueprint still on the table. "All very fascinating, but where is the human motive?" "Ah," said Poirot, smiling faintly. "Now we arrive at the crux. The precision of machinery may reveal the how, but always it is the passions of men and women that unveil the why." He took a small pace forward, his hands steepled. "When a crime is committed with such elegance, such detail, it is rarely the act of hatred alone. It is the work of someone who once felt great affection." His gaze fell on Daphne Winslow. She flinched. "You were the first to find the torn blueprint," Poirot continued gently. "You claimed it was retrieved from the hedge. That much was true. But you left out that it was you who had originally tried to burn it." Gasps rippled across the room. "No!" she began, voice cracking. That's not... You panicked, Poirot said softly. Simon had confided in you, but when you saw what he intended, what the invention might do, and what it might expose, you acted. Beatrix stepped forward now, eyes narrowed. Expose. Expose what? Poirot turned to her. Simon had discovered that someone had been stealing from the Brinsley Horological Archive, specifically from your father's restricted designs, the ones protected in the vault beneath the West.
Wing put wing the very same vault Simon had helped Sir Everard secure 2 years ago, and someone, you, Mademoiselle Beatrix, had quietly passed them along. Beatrix's jaw tensed. That's a lie? No, it is not, Poirot said more sharply now. The peculiar thing about rotational memory is that it reveals not only changes made, but who made them. Each alteration has a signature pressure profile like a fingerprint. Simon recorded it in his blueprint. And the record points to hands accustomed to delicate brushes and easels, not tools. Your hands. You're bluffing, she said coldly. But her voice had lost its surety. Poirot stepped aside, revealing Hastings now holding a small envelope. From Simon's secret compartment, he explained. Just recovered this morning. Beatrix's defiance faltered. Daphne's voice was faint. You knew about the invention, that it could detect fine manipulations. You were afraid it would show what you'd done. Poirot nodded. Indeed. But you did not act alone. Everyone turned as Giles Sutton stood slowly from his chair. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Simon trusted you, Mr. Sutton. You were once close. Fellow engineers, joint apprentices, you understood the theory of Simon's work. But when he refused to sell the patent, when he insisted it remain a non-commercial breakthrough, you grew angry. Giles's face twisted into something unreadable. You don't understand, he said hoarsely. That machine, it was worth millions. It could revolutionize transport, navigation, even aviation timing. But he wanted it buried under theory, for philosophy, not industry. And so, Poirot said, you sought leverage. You convinced Beatrix, already under pressure from debts and failed art exhibitions, to help extract the family plans from Sir Everard's archive. In exchange, you promised her a share in the profits once Simon's designs were folded into the master plan. Sir Everard staggered slightly. Beatrix! She looked away, lips tight, chin trembling. Poirot pressed on. But Simon suspected, he did not accuse. Instead, he refined his invention, a fail-safe, a memory lock embedded in the timepiece that would trigger if tampered with. He never told anyone, not even Daphne. He rode that final morning not for sport, but to calibrate the final layer of detection. And then, Mr. Sutton, you panicked. Giles looked up, something fierce and bitter in his eyes. He was going to ruin us. Poirot's voice became gentle again. He did not wish to ruin anyone, monsieur. He wished only to protect his work. But you sabotaged the cyclometric stabilizer. You calculated the overload timing down to the minute. A neat, surgical failure, something that could be mistaken for design error. Hastings looked grim. Only you didn't expect Simon to take a different route that morning. The timer went off half a mile early. The gear malfunction sent him head first.
Into the gravel. And then you destroyed the rest of the blueprint, Poirot added. Or so you thought. There was a long silence. Beatrix slowly sat down, head in her hands. Giles stood motionless, breathing heavily. Sir Everard turned to the window. I never imagined, he murmured, that my passion for clocks would lead to this. Poirot bowed his head. Time, Sir Everard, measures all things, even guilt. Chapter 11. The Arrest and the Quiet Hour. The weight of silence hung over Brinsley Hall like an overwound pendulum, every occupant suspended in the fragile tick-tock between accusation and consequence. Beatrix, pale and folded into herself, sat motionless on the velvet chaise. Giles Sutton stood stiffly by the fireplace, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked as if his molars might crack from the pressure. The shadows cast by the ornate clock behind him stretched long and thin, as if time itself was condemning him. Inspector Weatherby stepped forward, breaking the hush with a quiet rustle of his notebook. He looked not at Giles or Beatrix, but at Poirot. "You are certain?" he asked, though the tone betrayed no disbelief, only the formality of a man whose duty had caught up with truth. Poirot inclined his head. "Every piece is in place, mon ami. The motive, the opportunity, the technical knowledge, and most importantly, the signature pressure profile in the stabilizer's override mechanism. Only Mr. Sutton and Miss Beatrix possessed the means and knowledge to manipulate it." "I see," said Weatherby. He turned to Giles. "Mr. Sutton, I'm afraid I must ask you to come with me." Giles gave a bitter laugh. "That's it, then? No trial, no defense, just a neat little theory from a man who shuffles paperweights and moustache wax?" Poirot didn't rise to the bait. "There will be a trial, monsieur, and you shall be heard, but the evidence will not change, nor will Simon's design, which speaks louder than your protests." Weatherby stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Sutton's arm. The engineer didn't resist. His defiance had been scorched into something colder now, an acceptance, perhaps, or a numbness that would later harden into remorse or pride, depending on the man beneath. As the door closed behind the inspector and his charge, Beatrix slowly stood. "I didn't mean for him to die," she whispered. "I thought it would delay the unveiling, give us time to negotiate or pressure Simon into licensing the designs." Poirot nodded solemnly. "Intent does not always shield one from consequence, mademoiselle. But I believe your role, though complicit, was manipulated. You were afraid, and afraid people act rashly." Daphne moved quietly to Beatrix's side, offering her a hand. The younger woman hesitated, then took it. A moment later, they both vanished into the adjoining room, leaving only Poirot, Hastings, and Sir Everard in the salon. The baronet had sunk into his
armchair, his gaze blank and fixed upon the intricately carved mantelpiece. "I always believed," he murmured, "that the mechanisms we build are extensions of ourselves, that by perfecting our craft we refine our souls. But today I have seen how even the most exquisite machine can be twisted by human ambition." Poirot, for once, did not offer a correction or clever turn of phrase. He merely walked to the hearth where Simon's final prototype had been placed, the quiet marvel whose existence had shaken the household to its core. He turned it over gently in his hands. "Simon Brinsley believed in clarity, monsieur, in preserving not only time, but truth. He feared obscurity more than failure. That is why he hid the final signature code in the locking sequence. He knew someone would try to silence the invention, and so he allowed it to speak for itself." Sir Everard looked up. "And what of the device now? What becomes of it?" "That is for you to decide," Poirot said softly. "Its brilliance cannot be denied, but you must ask yourself whether the world is ready for such precision, or whether some mysteries, some flexibilities of memory, serve a purpose." There was a long pause. Then, almost inaudibly, Sir Everard replied, "Perhaps some truths should unfold slowly, like the ticking of a grandfather clock, not be wrenched open with gears and levers." Poirot gave a gentle smile. "Spoken like a man who understands time in all its shades." Hastings coughed discreetly. "If I may say, Poirot, I'd wager no invention, however clever, could match your little grey cells. You saw through it all." Poirot shrugged modestly. "I merely listened, mon ami. To the silences, to the misplaced gears, to the heartbeats between questions. Every mechanism tells a story. This one merely took finesse. He looked to the mantel clock, which had begun to chime the hour. "Ah, noon," Poirot murmured. "And fitting, I think. A time of clarity, of equilibrium." Hastings chuckled. "And perhaps time for a spot of tea?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Mais oui, my friend. Let us restore order, with scones and a proper infusion." As the two men stepped out into the corridor, leaving the shadows of Brinsley Hall behind, the great hall clock struck its 12th and final note. And within the silence that followed, the house seemed at last to breathe. Chapter 12. The final turn of the key, the rain had returned with a soft murmur by the time evening fell over Brinsley Hall. It tapped at the leaded glass windows with the rhythm of a watchmaker's heartbeat, steady, persistent, reverent. Poirot stood alone in the study now, his fingers lightly grazing the edge of Simon Brinsley's final notebook, the pages still open where the delicate sketches had last been traced. Outside, the storm washed the gardens clean, as though nature, too, wished to scrub away the residue of betrayal. The door creaked behind him. "May I?" came Sir Everard's voice, subdued but composed. Poirot turned and gestured toward the chair opposite. "Of course, monsieur." Sir Everard took his seat, his usual stiff elegance dimmed to something more human, more vulnerable. "I've decided," he said slowly, "to donate Simon's invention to the Horological Society in Geneva, on one condition, that it never be commercialized. Let it remain a work of study, of wonder, not war." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "A wise decision, one that honors your nephew's values." "Values I dismissed when he was alive," Everard admitted. "I saw his hesitation as youthful softness. I never considered that he was guarding something deeper, a purity of purpose." Poirot closed the notebook with a soft snap. "Too often we mistake restraint for weakness. But Simon, he understood that truth without kindness becomes cruelty." They sat in silence for a moment, both men staring into the fire that now crackled warmly in the hearth. Then the door opened again, Hastings drying his hands with a towel. "Ah, there you are," he said cheerfully. "I've just seen Daphne off. She's taking Beatrix back to London tonight. Said she wanted to give her a second chance." Sir Everard blinked. "She's forgiven her?" "Not entirely, I imagine," Hastings replied, "but enough to keep the past from devouring the present." Poirot gave a small smile. "Mademoiselle Daphne possesses a rare strength. She does not forget, but she understands that closure is not vengeance. It is peaceful." He rose, brushing a stray thread from his lapel. "Now, I believe there is one final matter I must attend to." The two others looked at him puzzled. Poirot walked to the far corner of the study, where the antique grandfather clock loomed tall, its mahogany face burnished with the care of generations. It had been silent since the day of Simon's death. "Simon repaired this himself not long before the accident," Sir Everard noted. "Oui," said Poirot, kneeling to open the lower hatch. Inside, tucked behind the pendulum, was a small brass key. "Ah," he said, retrieving it. "Exactly as I suspected." Hastings frowned. "A key?" Poirot turned the object in his palm. It was intricately made, the teeth notched with impossible delicacy. Engraved on the bow were the initials S.B. and something else barely visible, a tiny engraving of a clock hand circling back upon itself. "A final safeguard," Poirot murmured. Simon was a man of foresight. He moved to the desk, opened the drawer where Simon had kept his prototype, and with care inserted the key into a hidden slot beneath the base. A soft click. The machine buzzed faintly. A small panel slid open, revealing a hidden chamber within the device. Inside were two folded letters, one addressed to Sir Everard, the other to Daphne. Poirot hesitated only a moment before handing the first to the old man. Sir Everard took it with trembling fingers and opened it. His eyes moved slowly over the contents, and as he read, his face changed, not with sorrow, but with release. When he finished, he folded the paper quietly, pressing it to his chest. "Thank you," he said softly, though whether it was to Simon, Poirot, or time itself, none could say. Poirot turned to Hastings and offered the second envelope. "Will you see that Miss Winslow receives this, mon ami?" "With pleasure," Hastings said. He tucked it gently into his coat. Sir Everard stood now, straightening his shoulders. "I believe it is time I rewound the hall clock," he said, almost to himself. "It's been still for too long." Poirot watched him go. Then he glanced down at the prototype again, now quiet, its secrets laid bare. "Do you think it's truly over?" Hastings asked. Poirot shook his head slowly. "No, the past never ends, it only settles. But the truth, it no longer hides. And that, Hastings, is enough for now." They stepped out into the hallway together, where the ticking of the great clock had resumed at last. Outside, the rain had lightened to a mist, and the clouds had parted just enough to let the stars peer through, like quiet eyes watching over a house that had finally learned to breathe again. Chapter 13. Echoes in the Gears. It was nearly midnight when Poirot returned to his lodgings at the Bellwether Inn. The scent of beeswax polish and old rosewood lingered in the hallways, and the fire in the hearth had long since been reduced to glowing embers. Hastings was already seated by the window, a steaming cup of chamomile tea in hand, gazing at the glistening road that curved away from Brinsley Hall. "You were gone quite a while," Hastings remarked. "I began to wonder if there was some unfinished business." Poirot removed his overcoat and hat with practised precision. "Unfinished? Oh, number but curious, always, mon ami. That is the affliction of the detective." He walked to the writing desk, withdrew a folded piece of parchment from his pocket, and laid it gently on the surface. Hastings leaned forward. "Another letter?" Poirot nodded. "Not from Simon. This one arrived for me at the hall this evening. No name, no seal. Only one sentence. You saw only the surface. The mechanism goes deeper." Hastings frowned. Some sort of prank, perhaps? Or one of those reporters trying to stir up nonsense for the scandal sheets? Poirot tapped the letter thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but I find the wording most peculiar. You see, the mechanism goes deeper. What an odd phrase, no?" He paused, turning to face the fireplace where the embers pulsed like a mechanical heartbeat. Simon Brinsley's invention was a marvel. But it was not just a technical triumph. It was a message. He built into it more than accuracy. He embedded ethics, intent, and protection, yet someone still managed to exploit it. You're suggesting someone else was involved, but surely...
"Giles Sutton was the saboteur, yes," Poirot interrupted gently. "But what if he was not the only one with knowledge of the device? Or what if someone else knew he would fail and allowed him to?" Hastings stared at him. "Good heavens, Poirot, you don't think the murder was part of a larger scheme?" Poirot didn't answer at first. He walked to the window, peering into the fog-laced night, where the trees swayed like quiet watchers. "It is a possibility," he said finally. "Simon's invention threatened many industries, reputations, old empires built on imperfection and delay. What if Sutton and Beatrix were pawns in a greater game, used to destroy the man while someone else coveted the invention?" Hastings swallowed. "But the prototype is locked away now. The Hall will never commercialize it." "True," Poirot agreed, but the plans exist in other hands, at least partially. Remember, Sutton and Brinsley worked together for 3 years. A man like Sutton does not forget what he helps build, and now his silence is guaranteed by the bars of prison. Hastings considered this. Do you think Beatrix might know more? She knows what she helped him do, Poirot replied. But I suspect she does not know who else might have whispered in his ear. He lifted the letter once more. This is not a threat. It is an invitation. Someone wants me to keep looking. And that, mon ami, is the true danger? Then why not alert Inspector Weatherby? Poirot gave a small shrug. Because we lack proof, and because this opponent, whoever they are, prefers shadows. They will not act rashly, but they have revealed one weakness. What's that? Poirot's eyes sparkled, not with triumph, but with challenge. They wrote to me. A sudden gust rattled the window pane. Hastings instinctively turned toward it, as if expecting to see a figure in the mist. Poirot, meanwhile, opened his valise and began arranging small slips of paper, sketches from the notebook, photographs from the crime scene, pieces of the dismantled prototype he had requested for personal study. You mean to pursue it? Hastings said quietly. Poirot nodded. Yes, quietly, with caution. There is something unfinished in the rhythm of the case, a gear that still turns behind the others. He looked at Hastings. Will you help me, mon ami? Hastings smiled faintly. You know I will. Poirot returned the smile, but his eyes were elsewhere, on the tiny brass cog he held between two fingers. A cog with initials too worn to read, except for a faint L and an M, not part of Simon's mark at all. From outside, the church bell in the village square began to toll the hour. Poirot stood still, listening, counting 12 chimes, then, oddly, a 13th. But when Hastings turned to the clock on the wall, its hands read midnight exactly. He looked at Poirot. Did you hear? Yes, said Poirot, not blinking.
The mechanism goes deeper. Chapter 14. The Ticking Letter. The morning broke with a drizzle, soft, unhurried, but persistent, draping Brinsley-on-Thames in a veil of silver grey. Poirot, already dressed in a dove-grey suit with a matching cravat, sat by the hearth at the Bellwether Inn, examining the mysterious letter once again. He had read it perhaps 20 times since last night, yet its singular sentence had not lost its weight. You saw only the surface. The mechanism goes deeper. Whoever wrote this, Poirot murmured, knows how to speak in riddles, but not just for the sake of poetry. No, this is precise, controlled, deliberate. Hastings, still nursing his first cup of strong breakfast tea, lowered his newspaper. You truly believe this writer had a part in the crime? I believe, Poirot said, they may have orchestrated more than we imagined. He rose and fetched the envelope the message had come in. No return address, no markings, save a faint smudge on the lower flap. Poirot held it up to the light. There, just barely visible under the right angle, was an imprint, a watermark in the paper's grain. Saint Luthen's press, with a small emblem of a cogwheel. St. Luthen's, Poirot repeated thoughtfully. A paper mill? Hastings asked. We, and a rather exclusive one. They produce high-quality parchment primarily for scientific journals and engineering firms. Poirot's brow furrowed. Only someone with access to such paper, and reason to use it, would send such a message. Perhaps it was Simon's. Could there be leftover stationery from the hall? Poirot shook his head. No, mon ami. Simon used plain paper. I examined his study in detail. This is from elsewhere. Someone with a technical background. Someone who wants to hint, not confess. A knock came at the door. Poirot turned. Entree! The innkeeper, Mrs. Weatherby, Inspector Weatherby's cousin, as coincidence had it, entered with a small, curious look on her face. "A post came for you, Mr. Poirot. Special delivery." Poirot accepted the envelope with a polite nod. As soon as she left, he examined it. Unlike the last, this one bore a wax seal, plain, circular, and deep navy in colour. He opened it carefully. Inside was a folded schematic. No note, no explanation. Just a mechanical diagram, part of a gear assembly, intricately drawn, with annotations in meticulous handwriting. The bottom corner bore initials. L.M. Hastings stood to look over his shoulder. "Another letter? Good heavens, Buntsung, is that—" "A portion of Simon's design," Poirot confirmed. "But this gear, it was not in the prototype we dismantled." "Then someone modified it, or intended to," Poirot said softly. He turned to the fireplace and laid both documents side by side. The new schematic clearly depicted a hidden chamber within the time-regulating drum of the device, an area Brinsley never mentioned, nor included in his prototype. "A compartment," Poirot said. "Perhaps designed to record usage, or sabotage?" "And L.M.?" Hastings asked. "That," Poirot said, "is now our most important question." He tapped the initials, lips pressed in thought. "Someone remains in the shadows, but they are stepping closer." The rain outside quickened, pattering like ticking gears against the glass. Inside, Poirot stared at the drawing, the letter and the single phrase echoing in his mind. The mechanism goes deeper. Chapter 15. The name in the ledger. The rain had let up by mid-afternoon, replaced by a lingering mist that curled like breath along the cobbled lanes of the village. Poirot and Hastings, both clad in thick wool coats, stepped out of the Bellwether Inn and into the chill. Poirot walked briskly, his cane tapping the stone rhythmically. "Where exactly are we off to?" Hastings asked, trying to match Poirot's determined pace. "To the press, mon ami. St. Luthan's," Poirot replied. "If someone sent that letter and used their parchment, we must discover who had access, and more importantly, why they are revealing secrets now." It was a 15-minute walk to the edge of the village where the brick structure of St. Luthan's Press stood modestly behind a row of yew trees. The building smelled of ink and oil, and inside the quiet churning of paper rollers echoed like a heartbeat. A clerk, young and cautious, greeted them. Poirot introduced himself with polite flair. "I am investigating a matter related to the use of your specialty paper. Might I trouble you for a look at your client records?" The clerk hesitated. "Those aren't usually public, sir." "Ah, but I am not the public," Poirot smiled. "I am Hercule Poirot." The name, revered even in quiet corners of England, seemed to unlock a different response. The clerk led them to a back office, pulled a large, leather-bound register from the shelf, and flipped through pages filled with looping names, dates, and quantities. "We only sell this particular parchment to a handful of local organizations," he explained. "Mostly horological societies, patent offices, and the occasional collector." Poirot leaned over the ledger, scanning quickly. "Horological Society of London, yes. Royal Guild of Artisans. But this—" He tapped a name halfway down the page. "L.M. Hartfield. Commission set, July 8th. The ink was dark, fresh. Poirot's brows rose. "Do you know this Hartfield?" The clerk shook his head. "Not personally. It was an unusual order. 16 sheets, exact weight and watermark requirements, cogwheel emboss. Paid in full. They picked it up in person." "Did they leave any other information?" Hastings asked. "Forwarding address," the clerk said, pulling a second slip from beneath the ledger. "Just this!" Poirot examined it. "Elmwood Grange, Ormsley Heath." He smiled faintly. Elmwood. Grange, he repeated. Now that is a name I have heard before. Hastings looked surprised. From where? From Simon's old correspondence, Poirot replied, his eyes bright with memory. He once wrote to a friend, mentioning an engineer he briefly studied under, one Louis Hartfield. A recluse, but a brilliant mind. Simon called him a mentor in the mechanical arts. A link? Hastings murmured. And he's resurfaced. Indeed, Poirot said. The initials match. The handwriting may too. We must compare them, but this cannot be a coincidence. He straightened, tucking the slip into his pocket. I believe we are now chasing a ghost, a man who disappeared from public view a decade ago, a man who may know the truth behind Simon's final design. As they exited the press and stepped once more into the pale afternoon light, Poirot paused, glancing up at the grey sky. There is always someone behind the curtain, Hastings, someone who sees all the gears turning. The question is, he turned to his friend, do they wish to reveal the truth or bury it? The mist thickened around them as they began the journey back to the inn, unaware that someone from the far side of the street was watching them closely. A figure unmoving, barely visible in the fog. But their presence, like a tensioned spring, would soon be felt. Chapter 16. Elmwood's Forgotten Wing. The road to Ormsley Heath was narrow and lined with dying hedgerows. Fog clung stubbornly to the low fields, as though the moors themselves resisted the intrusion. Elmwood Grange soon emerged like a ghost, an imposing Georgian manor, half swallowed by ivy, its stone facade streaked with time. Poirot stepped out of the hired motor-car, cane in hand, and surveyed the building with narrowed eyes. "It is not welcome, Hastings," he murmured. "It watches." Hastings chuckled uneasily. "Let's hope its occupant is less foreboding." The heavy brass knocker echoed hollowly when Poirot rapped it. Moments later, a tall, stiff man in his 60s opened the door. His suit was well pressed, though clearly dated, and his eyes had the distant look of someone who spent more time with ideas than people. "Yes?" "Pardon the intrusion," Poirot said, stepping forward. "I am Hercule Poirot. This is my associate, Captain Hastings. We come concerning a parcel you recently ordered from St. Luthan's Press." The man's jaw twitched. "I'm afraid I won't entertain unexpected guests." "But this is not merely a social visit, monsieur," Poirot said gently. "It is a matter of death." The name, Hercule Poirot, seemed to disarm him, if only slightly. He stepped aside. Inside, Elmwood Grange felt preserved in time. Dark wood panels, rooms untouched, a ticking grandfather clock muffled behind thick curtains. He led them into what once may have been a library, though the books now shared space with blueprints, gears, and half-finished devices strewn across every surface. "I am Louis Hartfield," he said. "And yes, I ordered that paper." "You knew Simon Brinsley?" Poirot asked. A pause. "I knew the boy. Briefly. But not well? Well enough to see his ambitions. He was brilliant, yes, but reckless. He reached too far." Poirot studied the man carefully. "You sent a schematic, a modified version of the time regulation device." Hartfield frowned. "Did I?" Poirot pulled the parchment from his coat and unfolded it on the cluttered table. "This was your design?" Hartfield stared. His expression faltered for just a second. "It's old," he said. "A theoretical correction I once made. Brinsley must have stolen it." "But you had the original," Poirot said coolly. "You ordered the paper weeks ago. You mailed it, monsieur." Silence stretched long and thin. Then Hartfield sighed, turned away, and busied himself adjusting a brass model on the mantel. "I sent it because no one else would understand. Not the police, not the engineers. Only someone like you." Poirot stepped closer. What were you trying to tell me? That Brinsley's prototype was flawed, but deliberately so, Hartfield said bitterly. He presented a device he knew couldn't work, but underneath that, within the mechanism, I recognized my own improvement, hidden, as though he meant it never to be found. Hastings frowned. But why conceal it? Hartfield looked up sharply. Because it would have revealed he wasn't the sole inventor, that someone else's hand shaped his legacy. Poirot's eyes glinted. Yours? No, Hartfield said, not mine. He moved to a locked drawer and withdrew a single folded page. Brinsley's letters, he said. One of them refers to a collaborator, someone he trusted implicitly. A code name. Moth. Poirot leaned in. Moth? Curious. Hartfield nodded. It appears only once, but it's enough. Someone else helped build that machine, someone who disappeared just as quietly. Poirot took the page, scanning the handwriting. We are deeper in the clock now, Hastings, he said, quietly. And still the hands do not stop turning. From the window, a shadow moved across the drive, quiet, unnoticed. Someone was watching Elmwood and waiting. Chapter 17. The Watchmaker's Widow. Back in Brinsley village the night had fallen in solemn quiet, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the wind rustling through the ivy on the manor walls. Poirot sat by the fire in the Bellwether Inn's lounge, the parchment from Hartfield spread across his knees, his eyes scanning every stroke of the word moth as if willing it to yield more than mere ink. Hastings, seated opposite with a steaming cup of tea, leaned forward. You don't think Hartfield's hiding more, do you? Poirot tapped the edge of the letter with a single finger. But of course he is, not out of malice, none, but fear. You see, mon ami, when a man sends an anonymous letter implicating a genius as a fraud, it is because he fears being exposed just the same. He stood suddenly, folding the parchment crisply. Come, Hastings, I have a most particular visit in mind. At this hour? Poirot raised a brow. The truth does not sleep. 10 minutes later they stood before a crooked cottage near the edge of town, its front garden overrun with vines and wilted roses. The nameplate on the gate read Mrs. Edna Weatherby, etched faintly beneath flakes of green paint. The watchmaker's widow, Poirot said. Simon once apprenticed under her husband. She may know more than she's ever said. They knocked. After a long pause, the door creaked open. A frail woman with wiry grey hair and deep-set eyes peered out from behind a knitted shawl. "You're not from the bank," she said warily. "No, madame," Poirot said with a slight bow. "We come not for debts, but for memories." She hesitated, then motioned them inside. The interior was dim and cramped, the ticking of clocks filling every silence. Mantel clocks, cuckoo clocks, pocket watches hung like ornaments. Time moved differently in this house, slower, sadder. "My late husband," she said, motioning to the walls. "He never let a second slip." Poirot smiled gently. "Then you understand precision, madame. Perhaps you will help us." He produced the letter with the name Moth and unfolded it upon her small table. "We seek the identity of this moth. A code name, yes, but perhaps not so deeply veiled. Do you recall anyone Simon Brinsley worked with under such a name?" Mrs. Weatherby's lips pressed into a tight line. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a tin of peppermint lozenges. "I remember Simon," she said slowly. "So bright. But always looking over his shoulder, not from fear of failure, but betrayal." Poirot waited in silence. "There was a girl," she continued, "lived near the mill road. Clever hands, sharper mind. Simon used to bring her parts, watch gears, scrap brass. Said she had the fingers of a ghost. She signed her drawings with a little moth, just the outline. Hastings leaned in. Her name? Mrs. Weatherby shook her head. Everyone just called her Marnie. Her real name might have been Margaret something, but the children nicknamed her Moth, and it stuck. She left the village after the fire. Poirot's eyes flicked to Hastings. The Brinsley Hall fire? Yes, she said. After that, no one saw her again. They said she ran. Some said she died. But you don't believe that, Poirot said softly. Mrs. Weatherby reached beneath a stack of yellowed newspapers and pulled out a small folded napkin. Inside was a torn corner of parchment bearing the unmistakable sketch of a moth. She left this, she whispered, the day Simon died. Poirot stood very still, the flame of revelation beginning to catch in his eyes. She was no ghost, he murmured. She was the missing piece. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere distant, a bell chimed 11. And in that moment, Poirot knew the mystery was not simply about invention or rivalry. It was about someone who had been erased and who had just begun to return. Chapter 18. The Mechanism Unwound. A day later, all the principal figures gathered in the drawing-room of Brinsley Hall. Rain lashed against the tall windows. Wind rattled the glass like impatient fingers. A fire burned low in the grate, and Poirot stood before it, immaculate in navy, his eyes scanning each face as if rearranging them into a final pattern. Colonel Hartfield, pale and tight-jawed. Inspector Weatherby, arms folded, notebook ready. Miss Imogen Voss, seated by the window, tense but composed. And lastly, the return no one expected, Marnie Llewellyn, known once as Moth, standing in the doorway like a ghost returned to flesh. Mesdames, Messieurs, Poirot began, the time has come to unmask what lies beneath this tragedy. A man died, an invention vanished, a village was haunted, and yet it all hinges on a single hidden gear. He held up the modified schematic Marnie had anonymously sent. This blueprint was never part of the official patent. It reveals a secret within Simon's Chronometrica prototype, an inner chamber engineered not merely to measure time, but to record manipulation. A recorder? Weatherby asked. Precisely. Brinsley suspected someone had been tampering with the data his machine collected, so he built a mechanism to document who used it, and when. Poirot turned to Hartfield. And when he discovered that the false readings always aligned with your experiments, he knew. Hartfield's face twitched. Rubbish. You were jealous, Poirot said. Simon's work outpaced your own. You needed access to his research to publish first. So you offered partnership, pretended collaboration, but the Chronometrica's data undermined your theories because it revealed them to be flawed. You altered the readings. Hartfield surged to his feet. That's slander? No, Poirot said coolly. It is logic. You feared exposure. And so during the eclipse presentation, when all eyes were on the sky, you removed the recorder module. When Simon confronted you, there was a struggle, and he fell. The death was not premeditated, but what followed was. Poirot laid a gloved hand on the mantel. You blamed sabotage, blamed the machine, claimed fire, accident, confusion, but you did not account for one thing. He turned. Marnie. All eyes shifted to the woman by the door. She stepped forward, coat dripping, her dark eyes steady. I was gone, she said, but I kept watch. Poirot nodded. Simon had once wronged her, took credit for designs that were not his, but in the end, he sought to make amends. He included her modifications in his prototype. He even planned to name her as co-inventor. Hartfield's lips parted. She told me everything, Poirot said. She returned not for revenge, but justice. The anonymous notes, the schematic, the paper from St. Luthan's, all breadcrumbs for me to follow. Weatherby leaned forward. And the letter that said the mechanism goes deeper. Also her, but its meaning was layered. It referred to the literal hidden recorder, but also to the truth that Simon's death was not the result of rivalry alone. It was pride, deception, and buried guilt on all sides. Poirot folded his hands. In the end, no invention, no theory, no machine can measure the weight of conscience. There was silence. Then Weatherby stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Hartfield's shoulder. "I'll need you to come with me, Colonel." Hartfield didn't resist. He merely looked at Marnie as if seeing her for the first time. "He forgave you, didn't he?" She didn't answer. He was led out. The fire crackled once. Poirot looked to Marnie. "He wronged you, but you never became what he was." She managed a sad smile. "I only ever wanted the truth to outlast the lies." Poirot bowed. "And so it has." That evening, Poirot and Hastings stood outside as the clouds parted, revealing stars like silver dust across the velvet sky. "A shame," Hastings murmured. "Such a mind gone in vain." Poirot shook his head. "Not in vain, Hastings. The mind may fade, but the truth endures. Simon Brinsley died before he could clear his name, but his final act ensured it. And Marnie, she will be remembered, at last, as more than a whisper." Hastings nodded. "Where will she go now, do you think?" Poirot smiled. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere with tools and silence, to invent again, perhaps." They turned to leave. Far in the village, a clock tower struck midnight. And for the first time since Simon's death, the chimes rang clear, not broken, not manipulated, time at last restored to its rightful rhythm.